Before the story begins, take 1 second. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi where humanity punches far above its weight, tap like, subscribe for more HFY stories every week, and drop a comment telling us what you think the galaxy truly fears about humans. No species ever built a chamber that large unless it was meant for fear. The Hall of Concord hovered above the amber glow of the Kepri star, layered rings of alloy and light rotating in slow, ceremonial defiance of gravity. Within it, representatives of 87 civilizations stood or floated or pulsed within containment fields, their forms a gallery of the impossible. They had gathered for war. Officially, it was called an Emergency Stabilization Summit, but everyone in the chamber understood the truth. Entire regions of the galaxy were going dark and only one name followed the silence. The Varnak Apex. Predators by every scientific definition, the Varnak did not merely conquer. They erased. Systems went quiet not because populations fled, but because nothing remained to flee. No broadcasts. No debris fields. Just absence like a wound in space itself. Attempts at communication had ended with ships torn apart mid-transmission. Probes vanished. Fleets that ventured too close never returned. Now the Varnak frontier pressed against Alliance territory, and fear, ancient and collective, had finally overruled pride. A towering emissary of the Threll opened the session, its voice resonating like stone dragged across a cavern floor. Containment has failed. Deterrence has failed. The apex advance. Holographic star maps rippled above the floor, red fractures spreading outward from a blacked-out system labeled simply, Lair. A murmur swept the chamber, antennae trembling, skin patterns flashing distress, bioluminescent bodies dimming. Only one delegation remained still. The humans. They occupied a modest platform near the inner ring. No towering frames. No ritual armor. No visible weapons beyond the faint signature of defensive fields. 7 of them stood in dark uniforms trimmed with the understated blue of the United Terran Accord. At their center was a man who did not look like history in the making. Elias Ward watched the galaxy debate annihilation with the patient attention of someone listening for what was not being said. The Varnak do not negotiate, hissed a Yield procession mind from within its clustered bodies. They hunt. They feed. They move on. Then we must strike first, another voice replied. Total fleet mobilization. Elias finally shifted, folding his hands behind his back. You've already tried that. The chamber quieted, not because his voice was loud but because it was unmistakably human. Come. Unarmored. Unafraid. All prior engagements, Elias continued, ended the moment your formations entered their sensor range. From the Varnak perspective, you've only proven one thing. Several delegates turned toward him. And what would that be, Peacekeeper? The Threll emissary asked. That you only speak the language of threat. A ripple of irritation passed through the chamber. Humanity was a recent addition to the Alliance, a species that by galactic standards was physically fragile, short-lived, and perplexingly emotional. Useful mediators, some said. Dangerous idealists, said others. You assume, a scaled delegate growled, that there exists another language. There does, Elias said. His eyes lifted to the darkened region of the star map. But it can't be spoken by fleets. Silence followed, not empty but weighted. The Threll emissary tilted its massive head. Explain. Elias exhaled slowly. He had already made his decision long before entering the hall. The Varnak are apex predators. Their psychology is structured around dominance, threat assessment, and decisive violence. When you send armadas, you confirm their worldview. You tell them the universe is prey. And your alternative? Demanded another voice. I go alone. The chamber erupted. Wings flared. Limbs struck flooring. Electromagnetic fields spiked in agitation. Alone meant dead and everyone knew it. The Varnak Lair was not merely a location, it was a grave. You propose suicide, snapped the Yill. No, Elias replied evenly. I propose contact. You would not survive one rotation, the Threll warned. Elias met the emissary's gaze. That's not something a fleet can prove false. The human delegation did not interrupt. They had heard this argument already. They also knew something the rest of the chamber did not. Elias Ward had spent his entire adult life walking into situations everyone else had decided were impossible. Humans are not a predator species, came a skeptical voice. The Varnak will not recognize you as significant. Elias allowed himself a thin smile. That's precisely why they might listen. The star map shifted as Alliance analysts overlaid combat projections. Every outcome ended in catastrophic loss. Red bled into blue until distinction vanished. The alternative, Elias said softly, is extinction by delay. Another long silence settled in, this one colder than the last. At length the Thrall emissary spoke. If you fail, we proceed with sterilization protocols. Elias nodded once. Understood. Protocol drones descended. Authorization codes flashed. A single vessel was assigned, small, unarmed beyond minimal navigation defenses, its transponder broadcasting Peacekeeper status in every known frequency. As Elias turned to leave, one of the human delegates finally spoke, barely above a whisper. You don't have to do this. He paused, then answered without turning back. Someone does. Later, as the vessel detached from the hull and slipped into the dark between stars, Elias allowed himself one moment of stillness. Beyond the viewport, the Varnak system burned faint and ominous, a bruise against the cosmos. No species built a lair unless they intended never to leave it. And he was on approach. The Varnak system did not announce itself with fire or fleets. It was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as though space itself had been trained to hold its breath. Elias's ship crossed the system's boundary and every proximity alarm on the console lit at once, then died just as quickly. Sensors went blind, not from interference but from overload, as if the data they were trying to process refused to fit inside numbers. He didn't touch the controls. Manual resistance was a predator's reflex, and he had no intention of performing for unseen eyes. The lair came into view gradually, revealing itself not as a station or a world, but something that blurred the line between the two. It sprawled in slow orbit around a dead star, its surface layered in overlapping structures that resembled bone, chitin, and mineralized flesh. Nothing about it was symmetrical. Nothing about it was decorative. This was not architecture meant to inspire awe. It was meant to function, and what it functioned to produce was dominance. A corridor opened in the lair's surface like a wound accepting a blade. The docking sequence initiated on its own. Elias rested his hands on his knees as the ship slid inside, metal giving way to something warmer, textured, faintly pulsing. The hatch opened with no change in pressure, temperature, or atmosphere. The air smelled faintly metallic, old and clean at the same time, like rain on stone that had never seen a sky. He stood alone. The corridor stretched forward and down, walls curving inward just enough to remind him they could close whenever they wished. There was no guidance light, no signage, no attempt at hospitality. The message was clear: survive by understanding or die by assumption. Elias began to walk. Each step echoed dully, absorbed by the walls a moment later, as if the lair were listening. He passed alcoves filled with shapes that had once been ships. Some were crushed inward, others torn apart with surgical precision. He did not linger, but he catalogued the damage anyway, noting restraint where excess would have been easier. The Varnak did not waste motion. Good, he thought. That meant they could recognize unnecessary violence. The corridor eventually opened into a chamber so vast his sense of scale failed entirely. The floor descended in terraces toward a central hollow, and along the walls hung relics that were unmistakably trophies. Banners of extinct polities, shattered command thrones, preserved anatomy from species the Alliance had never categorized because there had been no survivors to study. At the chamber's center, something shifted. It rose not in haste, but with the certainty of mass that had never questioned its right to move. The apex alpha of the Varnak unfolded to its full height, towering above Elias by several lifetimes of evolution. Its form was angular and dense, layered in armored ridges that caught the chamber's low light and bent it into muted reflections. Multiple eyes fixed on him, not all oriented forward, some studying him in profile, others from angles that made no biological sense. Elias stopped at the edge of the central hollow. He resisted the instinct to look up. Predators read posture faster than language. "I have arrived as declared," he said, his voice carrying without amplification. "Under Peacekeeper mandate." No translator engaged. The words were spoken aloud because sound mattered to ritual, even if meaning did not yet. The Apex Alpha did not answer. Pressure built in the chamber, not physically but psychologically. Elias felt it press against his thoughts, probing for weakness, measuring reaction time, heart rate, microexpressions. He allowed it. Control was not the same as resistance. Finally, a voice emerged, layered and resonant, vibrating through the chamber rather than traveling across it. "You are small." "Yes," Elias replied. "You are alone." "Yes." "You carry no weapon." "That depends on the definition." A low rumble passed through the Alpha's chest. Amusement, perhaps. Or calculation. "You stand in the place where species end," it said. "Why?" Elias took a breath. This was the moment every simulation failed to capture because simulations could not reproduce consequence. Because when predators meet, one of two things happens. One dies or both change. Silence followed. Heavy. Evaluative. "You claim predator status," the Alpha said. "Your form denies it." "Our form never mattered," Elias answered. "Our choices did." The Alpha descended one tier, closing the distance with controlled inevitability. Elias did not retreat. He lowered himself instead, bending one knee until it touched the floor, his head inclined, not in surrender but in acknowledgement. "I recognize your dominance," he said, "not as ruler of this lair, but as an apex shaped by survival. I come to speak where fleets only shout." The Alpha stopped. Around them, unseen forces shifted, as if the lair itself had leaned closer. "No species kneels unless broken," the Alpha said. "Incorrect," Elias replied quietly. "Some kneel because they are unbroken." The Alpha's eyes narrowed. Pressure sharpened, testing his resolve like teeth closing around bone. Elias held still, letting fear pass through him without allowing it a voice. "You will speak," the Alpha declared, "until you fail. Or until you prove worthy of silence." Elias raised his head, meeting the gaze of something the galaxy had labeled unstoppable. "Then listen carefully," he said, "because I'm not here to stop you." The Alpha paused. "And that," Elias continued, "is exactly why you haven't killed me yet." The chamber remained silent, but the silence was no longer empty. Was attentive. The Apex Alpha did not move, yet the space between them felt suddenly smaller, compressed by interest rather than threat. "You claim inevitability," the Alpha said, its layered voice resonating through Elias's bones. "Explain." Elias rose from his kneel with deliberate slowness, not because he feared the Alpha's reaction, but because pace itself carried meaning here. "Predators don't need convincing when they agree with you," he said. "They only need clarity." The Alpha's gaze sharpened, some of its eyes closing while others dilated, attention reallocating like a shifting front. "Speak of your clarity, human." Elias gestured lightly at the trophies lining the chamber. "Your kind wins because you never question the cost of victory. You eliminate variables. You reduce complexity. That makes you efficient." A low sound rippled from the Alpha, neither affirmation nor denial. "But efficiency," Elias continued, "is not the same as endurance." The Alpha advanced another step down the tiered floor. The vibration rolled outward, a warning masked as curiosity. "Endurance belongs to those who remain." "Exactly," Elias said. "And that's the problem. You remain by ensuring no one else does." An edge entered the chamber's atmosphere, subtle but unmistakable. "You presume to instruct an apex," the Alpha said. "Explain your standing." Elias did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his uniform and withdrew a small, inert device. He set it on the floor between them and stepped back. "This contains our oldest war records," he said. "Not victories. Losses." The Alpha regarded the object, sensors piercing into its composition. "Why bring failure as offering?" "Because failure taught us something success never did." At a motion from the Alpha, an unseen force activated the device. Light unfolded in the air, not as a spectacle but as fragments. Cities burning under human-made skies, battlefields choked with the bodies of the same species on both sides, timelines collapsing under names like annihilation and near extinction. The Alpha watched without interruption. "We nearly erased ourselves," Elias said quietly. "Over territory. Over belief. Over dominance. We were thorough. We were inventive. From a predator's perspective, we were exemplary." The images shifted again, showing a small world scarred but living, populations rebuilding amid ruins. "And then," Elias continued, "we learned something no predator ever learns willingly." The Alpha tilted its massive head. "State it. That conquest has no termination condition." Silence stretched, deeper now, threaded with something unfamiliar. "Predation is endless," Elias said. "If you define survival as eliminating rivals, eventually you are all that remains. And even then you will turn on yourselves because dominance requires opposition." The Alpha's eyes flicked briefly to the trophies, to the relics of removed threats. "We recognized this pattern too late for billions," Elias said. "But early enough to stop." "You did not stop," the Alpha countered. "You persist. You expand." "Yes," Elias agreed. "But we built restraints into our dominance. Rules. Consequences. Systems meant to absorb aggression without erasing entire cultures. Imperfect, fragile ones, but they exist." The Alpha let out a sound that vibrated the chamber's core. "You claim to have mastered yourselves." "No," Elias said. "We claim we are afraid of what happens if we don't." The pressure in the chamber shifted. The Alpha circled him now, each step measured, its presence rearranging the air. "Why should an apex value fear?" "Because fear," Elias replied, turning to keep himself oriented without retreating, "is the only signal that warns you before extinction appears as certainty." The Alpha stopped behind him. Elias felt the heat of its mass, the calculated proximity of something that could end him without effort. "My kind has no extinction scenario," the Alpha said. "All who oppose us are removed." "Then you've blinded yourselves," Elias said, his voice steady. "Because the universe is not finite in hostility. Eventually, even you will encounter something indifferent to your threat displays. Something that consumes stars or rewrites physics. When that happens, what will you have built besides enemies?" The Alpha was silent for a long moment. "You offer alliance," it said at last. "A tactic of delay." "I offer comprehension," Elias corrected. "Alliance is just the operational outcome." The Alpha moved back to its original elevation. "You assert parity through abstraction. I assert relevance," Elias said. "You don't need us because you are weak. You need us because strength without limitation becomes predictable." The Alpha's gaze hardened. "Prove that humans are limited." Elias met the challenge without hesitation. "We submit ourselves to judgment," he said. "Continuously. We codify accountability so power cannot act without consequence. We let our strongest be restrained by the collective." "To an apex," the Alpha said, "that is irrational." "To a survivor," Elias replied, "it is evolution." The Alpha extended a taloned limb. The air condensed around it, heavy with the promise of finality. "Then be judged." The chamber darkened as the Lair itself seemed to withdraw, sealing memory, intent, and possibility into a single converging point. Elias remained standing. Whatever test the Alpha intended, it would not be physical. And he suspected that was the most dangerous kind. The first sensation Elias felt was weight, not on his body but on his sense of self, as though gravity had been reassigned to his thoughts. The chamber dissolved, replaced by a construct too vast to be seen at once. It was not a vision in the human sense, but a reconstruction built from extracted memory, expectation, and compressed probability. The Alpha's voice resonated from everywhere and nowhere. "Judgment requires context." Elias stood on a fractured plane under a sky scarred with unfamiliar constellations. The ground shifted beneath his feet, rearranging itself into places he recognized before he consciously understood why. A hospital corridor lit too brightly, air sharp with antiseptic. A negotiation table scorched at one end where talks had failed. A refugee transport drifting too long without clearance. Your failures, the Alpha said. All of them. Images overlapped, not in sequence but in weight. Faces he had spoken to in good faith and lost anyway. Orders followed precisely, still ending in death. Compromises accepted too late. Each memory pressed insistently, offering variations where different words might have saved more lives. Elias inhaled slowly, grounding himself. This isn't judgment, he said. It's temptation. The Alpha regarded him from the distance, immense even here. Explain. You're testing whether regret will make me desperate, Elias replied. Whether I'll bargain for absolution. That's what prey does when cornered. And you? The Alpha asked. I endure responsibility, Elias said. There's a difference. The construct shifted again. Now the plane was a vast command chamber, human-built and efficient. Fleet icons blinked across a tactical display. Elias recognized the scenario instantly, a past crisis simulated with altered parameters. This time he was given greater authority, fewer constraints. Here, the Alpha said, you may win faster. The implication hung sharp and heavy. Elias studied the projections as if for the first time. He saw the numbers, the advantage offered by decisive force. He saw how many lives could be saved by ending the conflict at its source. And he saw just as clearly what that victory would cost. No, he said. The Alpha's attention sharpened. Clarify. You want to see if I'll choose efficiency over accountability, Elias said. If I'll become what you are, given the chance. And you decline. Yes. Why? The Alpha pressed. When success is assured. Because success that erases choice teaches nothing, Elias said. If I take this path, the next decision becomes easier. Then inevitable. That's how predators forget restraint. The command chamber dissolved, replaced by a quiet human city at night. Lights glimmered. Life continued without knowing it was being weighed. Children slept beneath structures built by compromises Elias had helped negotiate. Power is seductive, Elias said, more to himself than to the Alpha. Especially when it works. The city faded. Elias found himself back in the Lair, the pressure eased but not gone. He looked up at the Alpha, sweat cooling against his skin. You did not choose dominance, the Alpha said. You chose limitation. I choose sustainability, Elias replied. There's a difference. The Alpha turned away slightly, its attention fracturing inward. Around them, the Lair stirred, structures subtly reconfiguring as if responding to internal deliberation. Time passed without markers. Somewhere far beyond the system, Alliance fleets waited, their commanders staring down countdowns no one wanted to finish. Your species restrains itself out of fear, the Alpha said at last. Yes, Elias agreed. Fear of becoming alone. The Alpha faced him again. We have never feared solitude. That's because you've never experienced it, Elias said. You eliminate it before it can teach you anything. Silence stretched again, but this time it felt uncertain. To spare your life, the Alpha said, would mark you as anomaly. To alliance with you would contradict our nature. Elias nodded. Evolution always does. The Alpha's gaze shifted, not to Elias, but beyond him, as if tracking variables that did not belong solely to either of them. The galaxy prepares to burn us away. Yes, Elias said. They fear what they cannot contain. And you, the Alpha said, placed yourself between predator and purge. Elias met its gaze without flinching. Someone had to stand where both sides could see the cost. The Alpha regarded him for a long, unreadable moment. Then it extended a limb, not in threat, but in demonstrative gesture toward the chamber's edge. Return to your place, it said. Elias did not move. Is that permission? Or dismissal? Neither, the Alpha replied. It is delay. Outside the Lair, weapons remained primed. Inside, the first crack in inevitability had formed. Elias exhaled slowly, understanding the danger had not passed, only changed its shape. Delay could become decision. And decision here would reshape more than one species. Elias stepped back from the central hollow as the Lair's ambient hum shifted, no longer probing, no longer testing. The Alpha remained still, but its presence had changed, subtle in ways that even the sensors of the most advanced Alliance ships could not detect. Something fundamental had shifted. "You have endured judgment," the Alpha said. Its layered voice was quieter now, deliberate. "Not by threat, not by fire, not by death, but by choice." Elias allowed himself a measured breath. "Endurance isn't victory. It's recognition. You survived too, but differently." The Apex Alpha's multiple eyes glimmered in acknowledgement. It took a slow, deliberate step forward, then another, closing distance yet not in aggression. "No species has spoken thus. Never so clearly. Never so willingly. And yet, you are here." "I'm here," Elias said, "because the galaxy needs a hand, not a hammer." He could feel the weight of his own conviction, the same determination that had carried him across uncharted light years into a predator's dominion. "And you needed someone to hold up a mirror." The chamber seemed to pulse in response, subtle vibrations coursing through the floor, walls, even the air. Elias sensed the Lair itself acknowledging the gravity of the moment. He had faced annihilation and chosen restraint, not out of weakness, but because he understood the cost of absolute dominance. The Apex Alpha moved to a terrace overlooking the trophies of extinct species and gestured with an articulated limb. "Witnessed by your species, all that remains of the conquered. And yet you do not fear us." "I do," Elias admitted, his voice calm. "But fear isn't the same as submission. I fear what happens when power goes unchecked. I respect what you are because the universe allowed you to become this, but I refuse to let fear guide me alone." The Alpha's attention lingered, unblinking. It had seen countless forms of courage, countless strategies and betrayals, yet none like this, a small, fragile species holding themselves steady amid overwhelming instinct to flee or fight. "You speak of restraint," it said, "and claim it as strength. Many would die before understanding such concept. Why should we believe you?" "Because we live by it," Elias said simply. "Not perfectly. Not universally. But consistently. We survive ourselves when no predator could. We do not seek annihilation of the galaxy because we can. We choose to preserve it." A long, measured silence followed. Then, to the surprise of every sensor, the Alpha lowered its massive head in what could only be described as contemplation. Around them, the Lair shifted subtly, retracting aggressive defenses, folding structures that once seemed immovable. It was a gesture of acknowledgement. "You risked all," the Alpha said, voice resonating across the chamber. "Not for yourself but for potential. Not for domination but for preservation. Such anomaly must be preserved." Elias nodded, absorbing the weight of the words. "Recognition is only useful if action follows. You can admire restraint, but without choice, even you remain trapped by instinct." The Alpha turned, sweeping a limb toward the outer corridors. "The galaxy fears us. Fleets are poised. Do you speak for them?" "I speak for the principle," Elias said. "The principle that the strongest do not always define the future by force. That sometimes life survives because someone chooses differently." Slowly, impossibly, the Alpha extended a second limb in a gesture of accord, a first in recorded history. "Then let this accord stand. A trial, not of weapons but of comprehension. Human." Elias Ward, "Your species demonstrates value beyond prey. Beyond predator. Beyond extinction." Elias allowed a brief, almost imperceptible smile. "Then let us make it official." The Lair seemed to breathe, exhaling centuries of accumulated dominance and lethal instinct. Outside, the fleets waiting to strike received transmissions unlike anything expected. The Apex Alpha acknowledging a non-aggression pact, ordering all forces to stand down. The galaxy froze in disbelief, watching as an entire species of apex predators bent not to fleets, but to understanding. Elias stepped toward the exit, feeling the Lair beneath him reverberate with subtle approval. He had walked through death without armor, without weapons, and without deception. And yet he was alive. More than that, he had reshaped the understanding of what humans were capable of, what restraint, courage, and principle could achieve in the face of instinctual terror. The Alpha followed him to the threshold, towering and silent, yet present. "You walk unscathed, human," it said. "Not because we spared you. Because you proved a concept beyond instinct. We will honor it." Elias met its gaze, unwavering. "And we will honor the trust in return. Not through dominance, but through action that deserves it." The doors of the lair closed behind him as he stepped into his vessel. Outside, the dead star's light reflected off the hull, indifferent and eternal. Yet somewhere deep in the system, a predator watched the human leave, an apex witness acknowledging a species that refused to be merely prey or predator. The message sent across the galaxy was clear. Humans had entered the lair of the deadliest hunters known to the stars. They had faced judgment and trial without raising a weapon. They had chosen restraint when annihilation seemed inevitable. And they had walked out not as survivors of a hunt, but as architects of a fragile, improbable alliance. Elias exhaled, feeling the weight of expectation shift into possibility. The fleets waiting outside slowly disengaged, commanders realizing the decision had been made, not by firepower, but by a single human who understood that sometimes the greatest strength lies in choosing not to strike. As the vessel slipped into faster-than-light transit, Elias allowed himself a rare thought. The galaxy had not seen the last of him, nor of the species he represented. Predators had learned fear, fleets had learned patience, and the Alliance had learned the lesson that only humanity could teach. The Alpha's words echoed faintly in his memory, a resonance that would linger far longer than any trophy or weapon. "You have survived yourselves. And in doing so, you have reshaped the future." Elias leaned back in his seat, letting the hum of the engines carry him away. He was no longer just a human in the galaxy. He was proof that one species, small and fragile in appearance, could stand where predators and empires faltered, and emerge with the weight of the stars changed by principle, courage, and choice. The galaxy exhaled, uncertain, wary, and yet, somewhere deep inside, hopeful. And somewhere deep in the lair, the Apex Alpha watched the humans' retreating silhouette, silent and calculating, aware that a new variable had been introduced to the cosmic equation. A predator had witnessed a species that did not obey instinct alone, a species that could teach restraint. And for the first time, the Alpha considered that the future might require more than teeth and claws, it might require understanding. The doors closed completely. Outside the stars waited. But humanity had stepped onto a stage no one had expected, and for the first time the galaxy did not know what came next. Elias Ward, human, peacekeeper, survivor, had walked into the lair of apex predators, and walked out with the fate of a galaxy in his hands.